Our fourth story is called Mr. Men Adventure in China, written by the same artists. When Miss Lucky and her friends went to the art gallery, she was very impressed by a picture of a dragon. Mr. Jelly was not so impressed. The picture made him wobble with fear. "That's a Chinese dragon," said Miss Brainy. "Dragons are considered lucky in China." "I don't think it would be very lucky to meet one of those things," quivered Mr. Jelly. "I'd like to see a dragon," said Miss Lucky. We could go to China and find one." "We could go to China," agreed Miss Brainy, "but I doubt we would find a dragon. But I don't think that dragons are real." All of Miss Brainy's friends thought that a trip to China was a very good idea and wanted to go as well. And within a week they all found themselves on a tour inside the Forbidden City, the palace of the Chinese emperors. It took Mr. Bub no time at all to have fallen in the moat, and to have tripped on the steps leading to the hall of supreme harmony. Bump, bump, bump. Poor Mr. Bump. There is not much harmony in his life. And there was no harmony for anyone when Mr. Noisy discovered the drum tower. Bang, bang, bang. Mr. Jelly got the fright of his life. They saw many extraordinary things in China, like the terracotta army, a whole army for Mr. Tickle to tickle. But they turned out to be an army of life-size day model soldiers. Mr. Tickle had to make do with tickling Miss Brainy. The next day they had lunch in a restaurant. Mr. Clumsy had terrible trouble using chopsticks, but he did not make as much of a mess as Mr. Messy. Miss Brainy and her friends then discovered that China was a very big country with a very big wall, the Great Wall of China. It stretched as far as the eye could see. It stretched as far as two eyes could see. And then a whole lot further, it would take weeks to walk the length of it, unless you are Mr. Rush, the fastest thing on two legs. After visiting the Great Wall, everyone went to see the rice fields. "Look," cried Miss Lucky, pointing up to the sky. "It's a dragon." And there above them there was indeed a dragon. "Oh, help!" shrieked Mr. Jelly in fear. But it was not a real dragon. It was a kite flying in the air. And then suddenly the sky was filled with lots of kites. "Kites were invented in China," declared Miss Brainy. Next, their journey took them to a river. "Look," cried Miss Lucky, "it's a dragon." And there was indeed a dragon's head coming round the corner. "Oh, help!" shrieked Mr. Jelly. Again. But it was not a real dragon. Again. It was a dragon boat racing down the river. "Thank goodness," sighed Mr. Jelly with relief. Miss Lucky was determined to find a real dragon. Her search took them further up the river. The fishermen were using cormorant birds to catch fish. However, nobody caught any fish while Mr. Noisy was on the river. He scared them all away. And that was not the only thing he scared. Poor Mr. Jelly. Then they travelled to the foothills in search of a Miss Lucky's dragon, and got lost in a bamboo grove. Luckily, Miss Hug made friends with a panda who showed them the way out. "What we need is a nice cup of tea," suggested Miss Lucky. At the tea house there were lots of types of tea to choose from. There was yellow tea for Mr. Happy, there was green tea for Mr. Clumsy, and then there was red tea for Mr. Noisy. Miss Fickle could not make her mind up. They did not have any orange tea. After tea, they drove up a winding road that turned and twisted into the mountains, where Miss Lucky was convinced she would find a dragon. Miss Sprainey was not so convinced. Mr. Dizzy did not feel very well. There were so many bends in the road that he had a funny turn. They crossed over a bridge and found themselves in the mountains, and then it began to rain. And it rained, and it rained, and it rained. The sound of thunder rolled and echoed around the surrounding mountains. Lightning flashed across the stormy sky, and a torrent of water ran down the sides of the mountains. And before they knew what was happening, Miss Lucky and all her friends were trapped by a flood. "Oh, help!" cried Mr. Jelly in fright. Suddenly a huge dragon rose up out of the flood waters, and this time it was a real dragon. "Oh, help!" squeaked Mr. Jelly. "It's a dragon! It's a huge, terrible dragon! A huge, terrible dragon with enormous sharp teeth who's going to eat us up!" But the dragon did not eat them up. It flew up through the lashing rain into the great black storm, and with its long tail and powerful claws, beat the clouds away. The sun came out, and they all breathed a big sigh of relief. "I told you we would find a dragon," said Miss Lucky. "And I told you they were lucky," said Miss Brainy. "Lucky for all of us," laughed Miss Lucky. And even Mr. Jelly had to agree. That story was called Mr. Men's Adventure in China. It's time for our final story.